Hi, everyone. Looks like we've got quite a few people on the line now joining us. My name is Teresina. I'm from CoreWorks, and thank you for joining us today for Alan Kendall's presentation, Indispensable Project Practices and Owner's Perspective. We'll have Alan get started on his presentation shortly. Just a couple of housekeeping items here. All attendees will be muted for the presentation just to reduce feedback. But if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, you can either hang on to them till the end or feel free to write them in that Q&A section. It's a little chat box there that says Q&A. And Vernon and Risa, who are joining us from Houston, along with Alan, will go through those questions at the end of Alan's presentation. Also, we'll make the presentation available for download on our website. It'll be available sometime next week, and we'll send out an email when it's online. So just a little bit about CoreWorks, just in case some of you haven't heard of us. We provide information management software for EPCs and owners, and we have a unique blend of software options available, including interface management and project information control. We're in over 40 countries worldwide. We have over 100,000 plus users. We're on over 700 projects, totaling investment value of over $950 billion worldwide. And if you did want any more information on CoreWorks, we're available to answer any questions at the end of the presentation. And Vernon and Risa are in Houston, and if you happen to be in Houston, they're happy to come meet with you as well. So this is just a small diagram of some of our tools. As I mentioned, we do have interface management, change management, document control, document deliverables, several solutions available and designed specifically for capital projects. And again, if you want more details on that, we're happy to give you more information after the presentation. So as I mentioned, we're pleased to have Alan Kendall with us today. Alan is a project manager who implemented standard practices and processes across several oil and gas projects. In the next 30 minutes, Alan will describe some of the challenges he has experienced implementing change, risk, and interface management practices on owner projects. Alan also will offer tips on gaining adoption and highlight the benefits of his projects that his projects gain by implementing these practices and processes. So as I mentioned, joining Alan in Houston is Vernon Hutchinson, our Director of U.S. Sales, and Risa Parker, our U.S. Business Manager. With that, I will pass it back to Alan, and he can give information about himself.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us as well. So this is Alan Kendall from Houston, and thanks to you from all over the world who may be joining from various different time zones. Welcome. So as was mentioned, my prior experience has been in contract work just for the past 10 years, really with the owner companies BP, Chevron, and Shell. And I've worked in leadership capacities in project management, interface, risk management, management of change, et cetera, et cetera. Have supported in one way or another many different projects that are listed there as well. So Appomattox, Atlantis, Bonsai, et cetera, Greater Longview, Cascada, Mad Dog Phase 2, et cetera. Okay, and checking to see if I have control of the presentation here. Okay, here we go. So today we're going to talk about some indispensable project practices, including integration management and interface management, and I want to talk about the difference between those. We'll also talk about management of change, as well as touch on risk management. So we'll start by talking about integration management and interface management. I'll jump into risk management and management of change. So first of all, the Project Management Institute puts out a guide to the project management body of knowledge. And if you're familiar with that, most people call it the PMBOK or PMBOK guide. The PMBOK defines project integration management as including all the processes and activities to identify, define, and combine and unify all of the various processes and project management activities within the project management process groups, and I'll show you what those are in just a second as well. So it includes the characteristics of unification, consolidation, communication as well, integration actions that are crucial to control project execution. And it also includes making choices about resource allocation, trade-offs as well among competing objectives and alternatives, and managing the interdependencies among those project knowledge areas. So again, from the kind of the PMBOK perspective, and this particular example comes out of Crosswind Project Management. The intent of this here is to show you that project integration management really encompasses all of these various areas. So within the Project Management Institute's guide, they talk about 10 knowledge areas and a total of 47 processes. So project integration management is kind of the whole project, or the project as a whole. But I want to talk to you about interface management now. Interface management then is a process for managing and ensuring the flow of crucial information, critical information, in a timely manner between the various delivery teams and stakeholders. So it's very important that you understand the interface responsibilities as well as contractual interfaces. You need to have a communication structure in which interface discussions can be held. And it's important that all interfacing stakeholders appoint an interface, what we called a single point of contact, or abbreviated, we just kind of called it a SPOC. And the single point of contact is supposed to ensure that all interfaces are fully managed within that particular person's domain. In my past experience, I have served as an interface manager for a couple of different projects, and in those cases it's generally best that project interface manager report directly to the project manager, but may or may not serve in both capacities. What I'm trying to say is, we talked about integration management before, and this is interface management. You may have one person serving in both capacities, or you may have two separate people responsible for that. So then the owner delivery teams should also have their single point of contacts, and these in my recommendation should be indirect reports to the overall owner project interface manager. So in my case, with a particular project that we worked, we had a topsides delivery team, we had a subsea team, we had a hull and mooring team, and each of those key delivery teams had a single point of contact for interface management, and those people were indirect reports to me on the project. So in addition, any owner support team whose function is not really embedded within a delivery team, maybe it crosses the responsibility for multiple delivery teams, and they should have a designated SPOC as well. So the example that I give there is the regulatory team. So when a regulatory question comes up, regardless of which delivery team that originates from, you need to have a way of getting that question to the regulatory team and getting that answered. So one critical piece is you must start with a robust interface management plan. And really this is essential to successful project interface management. The interface management plan is going to define the methodology used to identify, manage, and resolve the interfaces, and it's going to outline roles and responsibilities. It also sets expectations between internal and external interfaces, and it's going to talk about who are the dedicated interface managers or single points of contact for the various teams. This interface management plan should also spell out some information about meeting schedules and recommended attendees for those meetings. And in our particular case, we had, as I've mentioned, a topsides, hull and mooring, and a subsea team. We could just abbreviate that as Team A, Team B, and Team C. So we had a Team A and Team B meeting, we had a Team B and a Team C meeting, and we had a Team A and a Team C meeting. So we would host those meetings on a bi-weekly basis, and then on a fairly regular basis, we would get everyone together to have an all-team interface meeting. So the interface management plan also should talk about reporting metrics. How are you going to measure the effectiveness of the progress of those interface agreements? and are they being resolved in a timely manner? And lastly, it's going to outline key definitions. So what is an interface agreement, and how does that work? So we got a variety of interface management lessons learned. Having worked in this capacity over several years, we've seen some things done very well and seen some things done not so well, but we always learn from the process and hopefully improve from that. So one critical thing, and we were very fortunate to have this in the projects that I worked on, senior management buy-in for interface management is essential. If, and I was asked a question at one time, what if you don't have senior management buy-in? You really need to educate the senior management to the importance of interface management and explain and kind of outline why they need someone dedicated to this role. So the interface management, another lesson that we have learned is you must build contractual terms for interface management into your agreements with EPC, EPCM, IC agreements. So those contractual agreements that you have, maybe it's an appendix to the document that you have with these companies, should spell out the importance of interface management. It should talk about how interfaces are going to be managed, maintained, updated, what systems are going to be used to do that as well. And as I talked to, you really need a robust interface management plan. Another thing is, it's very important to develop your interface register early on in the project. I talked about holding regular team meetings. In my particular case, I've talked about some of the meetings that we had on a bi-weekly basis and then on a approximately monthly basis for the entire project. But when you have those team-on-team meetings, let's say Team A on Team C, you're going to go over the open interface requests preferably in some kind of a register fashion. It's important that Team A and Team C confirm delivery dates. So Team A may say, I need this information from Team C by that date. And the Team C needs to say, yeah, we can do that date. Or if Team C, for some reason, cannot achieve that date, they need to negotiate a new delivery date with Team A. So as you go through in your regular team interface meetings, you're going to also identify upcoming expectation dates. So within the next 2 weeks, Team A is needing this particular information from Team C. How is Team C progressing with that information? And conversely, Team C may need some information, important data from Team A. One particular example of that, when you're putting the top sides on top of a spar or a semi, you need to know all the touchdown points, right? Where is that top sides, where are the entire top sides modules going to touch down on the top of your spar or your semi? And that's just one example. Training is really, really important as well. So it's possible you may be in a situation where your senior management, perhaps they understand the importance of interface management, but the delivery teams may say, well, we don't need that. We've never done that in the past. So it's very important to get everybody on the same page. And by the way, I've talked about some hard interfaces there when I've talked about the top sides and the hull and mooring interface, or interfaces between subsea equipment and the top sides. But there are also soft interfaces that are important as well. In addition, one of the things that we did on our project was we identified key points of interface, and we went so far as to outline who would be responsible for various roles on that at that particular interface point. TUDA stands for Topsides Umbilical Termination Assembly. So we outlined which team would specify, which team would engineer, which team would be responsible for procuring, who would be responsible for the design integration, who's going to oversee construction fabrication, and then later installation, hookup, and commissioning. So here are just a few examples from from a project that we worked: chemical ejection, subsea control room, etc., hydraulic power units. And we went into great detail about this. If possible, it is highly beneficial to understand these key points of interface very, very early on in the project. And in fact, it's even more beneficial if you can in some way number those or name them in such a way that everybody's speaking the same language. So this to particular interface point would ideally have some kind of an interface number or point assigned to it, so that you can talk about that particular point where two different teams are coming together. So let's talk about obtaining alignment. So some challenges. Occasionally, folks say, well, we've never really focused on interface management before, and don't our traditional project management elements cover all interface responsibilities? Well, it's very important to ensure that your interface management program matches the degree of complexity for your project. So some projects, a very small, couple $1 million project, maybe it's not so essential. But when you have multiple different delivery teams, also in multiple different geographic locations, it's extremely important that you communicate to the folks the importance of that. So another challenge could be that some people say it requires other project management processes to run well. Well, I've talked about the interface management plan, and if you identify those interface management processes very early and understand how they work with the project teams, that's a strategy for addressing that challenge. You may have a challenge of unclear boundaries of project processes. So how does interface management overlap with some of the other project processes? And it's important for you to spell that out. Another challenge may be lack of reliable integrated schedule. And this is where I talked about weekly, bi-weekly, whatever standard recurring meetings make sense for your particular project to prioritize those critical interfaces. So, okay, let's talk about management of change now. First of all, you like the interface management plan, it's essential that your project develop a management of change plan. So this plan should identify what types of changes require a management of change, and how will change issues be documented, reviewed, approved, and reported, and then what are the roles and responsibilities for reviewing and approving. As an example there about roles and responsibilities, you may have particular levels of your organization who can only approve changes for a certain dollar amount, let's say. And so you may have changes that can be approved at the project manager level, or some that require involvement of the project director, or perhaps even a vice president. So then how will these be communicated also is very important. Likewise, how are your contractual parties going to document their changes? And how is that communication going to take place between the owner company and the contractors? So it's very important that you select and deploy a common integrated management of change system. This management of change system should offer very good status reporting as well. And in my case, I was designated the kind of management of change expert who understands the policy procedure in the MOC system, so that when questions come up, people may have a question such as, is it necessary to document a management of change in this particular case? That expert would understand that. And the expert would understand things like procedures, and it's very important that that expert understand the management of change system as well. Sometimes we had situations where a management of change document might get sort of stuck in the process, if you will, and we also had cases where someone might approve the management of change, but then later come back to you and say, I accidentally clicked the wrong button, I need to recall that because I want to add a comment. So that MOC expert should understand how all of that takes place. So I've seen examples where owners and contractors may be maybe they have prior work history, but perhaps an ineffective MOC process. So at the outset, it's important to look at your MOC process and ensure that you have an updated and more effective MOC process that maybe incorporates lessons from your last project. And again, that should be documented and understood by all. Another challenge is how do you obtain reviewer feedback? In an ideal world, your management of change system is going to have built-in workflow, for instance, and maybe this management of change requires review by 3 or 4 different managers, and only once those 3 or 4 different managers have agreed to it could it then progress for approval. So your process needs to understand how that reviewer feedback is obtained and how their feedback might be reincorporated if necessary before it ultimately can reach the approval level. Another challenge, maybe there's unclear boundaries of project processes. So it's important that your interface management process also understand the management of change process and that be spelled out in your interface management plan. And another challenge is that you could have a lack of dedicated system for review and approval. Again, it's very important that you document this process, ideally with a flow diagram, and as I mentioned, it's extremely important if you can automate that with a common system as well. Okay, we'll talk briefly about risk management. You know, a goal of risk management is to, one goal clearly is to avoid harm to people and the environment. You also want to maximize business opportunity and value. Risk management raises awareness and accountability as well, and can help minimize crisis, surprises, problems, etc. Furthermore, the risk management should help you by decreasing overall project variances and essentially prevent problems from occurring and minimize their impact. Ideally, this would help you improve your overall project success as well. And before I go on, I want to say that risks can be positive risks and negative risks. So you could have a negative impact to your project, but you could also have a situation where we have an opportunity to capitalize on if we simply focus on this opportunity. At a very big picture level, a process for risk management might look something like this. So you need to plan your risk management processing and then identify those risks. You'll perform quantitative risk analysis. The quantitative risk analysis will include things such as probability of impact and what if that particular risk were to occur? What would the impact be? These need to be documented in a risk register, and then you may want to develop response plans for those. Now, again, back to PMBOK, there are a couple of different ways that you can manage a risk, right? You could choose to avoid the risk, you could choose to transfer that risk, or you could choose to mitigate or manage that risk. In the event that you develop a response plan, and again, this may be a response plan for a negative risk or positive risk, it's important that you assign a resource who will then implement that response and the appropriate management level who can go in and review the status of the response. Once the manager reviews the status and agrees that the response has been implemented as desired, you can then close the risk, and ultimately all of this can lead to improvements for your subsequent projects. One very useful way of looking at your risks, and we talked about a risk register. I've seen cases where risk registers were done in Microsoft Excel, and then I've seen cases where risks were managed in an online tool, an integrated tool. The Microsoft Excel tool does not necessarily or typically have workflow built into it, so that's something that your online tool can do. Now, this particular grid that you see here allows you to chart probability versus impact for a variety of risks. And it's important that you're regularly monitoring the progression of your risks as these response plans are implemented, but it's also important that you see here we have some boxes colored in green, some in yellow, and some in red. Now the way that this was defined were we simply looked at probability, very low to very high on a scale of 1 to 5. We looked at impact on a scale of 1 to here we have 16 with very high, okay? So we produced a multiple here and came up with a way of deciding that any risk that has a multiple lower than 5 can be looked at in the green category in terms of severity. Risks that have a multiple between 5 and 10 can be looked at as a moderate. And then anything here with a 10 or greater should be looked at as a very high degree of severity. And this next bullet here talks about who you need to ensure who has clarity or who has the authority to sign off on various levels of residual risk. So in the severe consequence category, that could potentially require vice presidential approval. This might be project director approval. And the green risks could be approved at the project manager level. Okay, so there's some challenges, of course, in risk management. You might have no assigned project risk management resource. There's an opportunity. You should assign and train a dedicated risk manager for the project. I've been in cases where that training is centralized even at a kind of a corporate level so that all risk managers across all projects are implementing the same standard policies and procedures, and that's very useful. You may have a challenge that project safety risk and project risk management overlap. It's very important that you record and manage your process safety and project risks separately, because the impact of an oil spill or harm to a person is very, very different than the impact of potentially delayed delivery of a component that might end up costing you several $1,000s as a consequence. Another challenge may be that there's no risk management owner within the lift. This is very common. Risks are identified, but really no one either raises their hand or no one is appointed to own those risks as well. But furthermore, you're going to need a risk management owner within your delivery teams or contractors. And as I talked about interface management, SPOCs, you also need a risk management champion or SPOC, if you will, single point of contact for those delivery teams and the contractor. And your overall project risk manager should be reviewing the risk management plans of the contractors to make sure that those dovetail nicely with the overall project management or project risk management plan. Another challenge may be that there's no way to set due dates for risk responses. If you simply must have a way of documenting a particular due date when a risk response needs to be implemented. Ideally, your risk management system should allow the risk response dates to be set. Okay, on one bonus slide here, I'll talk briefly about document management. This is something that kind of underpins a whole lot of these other things that we've talked about. And the importance of document management really cannot be overstated. So your document management and information management procedures need to have clear protocols for how documents are numbered, both for owner companies as well as EPCs. Ideally, you should create a master document register early on in the project. And associated with that, maybe a document distribution matrix. So as we produce key documents such as an interface management plan, or a risk management plan, or the statement of requirements, or basis for design, how are those documents going to be distributed? Who needs to see those documents? Furthermore, your information management needs to talk about transmittal procedures. So how is your owner going to transmit documents to the EPC and vice versa? How is potentially an EPC company going to transmit those documents to the owner company? Furthermore, I've seen examples of multiple owners get involved, and maybe someone drops the ball in transmitting documents between owner company A and owner company B. Perhaps their document manager might have been on vacation, and maybe no particular person at company B picked up that document and ensured that it got to the right right personnel. So that gets to acknowledgement of transmittals. It's important that you have a way of showing that that has been actually received and acknowledged at the other side. Likewise, we talk about review and comment procedures. So how is your statement of requirements going to be, how are you going to receive comments on that basis of design or project execution plan, whatever that document is. And last but not least, you need to have some assurance. It's highly beneficial if your document management system is also integrated with other systems that I've talked about in this presentation. So your management of change system, your risk management system, your interface management system ideally should have a way of tying in or at least referencing documents that are impacted by those procedures. And then last but not least, the document management or information management plan is going to talk about retention policies for documents. So I bring this up because if you don't have a partner who's working well with your organization, I would encourage you to find a partner who will work with your organization. And I've seen cases where document management system may be a bit outdated and maybe needs to be looked at for replacement. So in the event that your current system is not working for you, you should consider migrating to a new system if that existing system is not achieving the goals of the project. So I'll touch on a few final recommendations. One, it is essential that you have a very experienced project leadership team. As I've also mentioned, you need to clearly document and obtain approvals for things like project charter, statement of work, project management plan, change control, project execution plan, and many other documents. You'd also make stakeholder management a priority. Communication is very, very important there. You need to ensure that assurance policies and procedures are well documented and assured, and seek ways to streamline policies and procedures based on those shared learnings. Here's another interesting one. I strongly encourage an owner company out there to not engage contractors until the owner has fully approved and allocated appropriate funding. So I've been a member of a project team where we actually engaged an EPC team thinking that, well, we had approval for $2 million to get started, and we were completely confident that we would get approval for the remaining funds to continue on. Well, those remaining funds were not approved, and ultimately we had to tell the EPC personnel to essentially stop work and wrap up all their work. It was a very, very awkward time. Another recommendation is I would recommend that you co-locate appropriate owner personnel at your contractor sites. In the case of a project that I mentioned before, we had personnel located at AMEC Foster Wheeler, we had personnel located at Technip, and we had personnel located at Genesis Oil and Gas. And we had the owner personnel who were actually sharing seats on the exact same floor and interacting on a regular basis. So that's very, very important. I touched on this before, but I highly recommend that you assign a dedicated interface manager to the project, someone who fully understands interface management, roles and responsibilities, procedure, system, and who essentially can teach this to everyone else on the project, and then also ensure that interface management is being appropriately followed through the course of the project. All of this should be documented in a robust interface management plan, and the project interface manager needs to review, align, and approve EPC, EPCI interface management plans as well. So another thing that I've seen is it's a recommendation really that you consider an integrated versus point solutions when you're looking at software to handle these needs. So I've seen cases where we've used 5 different systems for action tracking, management of change, risk management, interface management, etc. And with 5 different disparate systems, we had folks who needed to create a login for those systems. Occasionally, a couple of months would pass before they needed to review a management of change, for instance, and they might have forgotten their password for that system. So it became a little bit cumbersome. So if you have an integrated solution, this will prove highly beneficial to your project. And then I've touched on this before, but it's essential that you communicate, communicate, communicate. So another example of that is I saw a project that went from a project select stage to a project define engineering stage. And the folks who were out there in the field hadn't been told that the owner corporation had approved that progression of the project into the defined engineering stage. And okay, it happened to take place over the course of a holiday in the very end of the year. However, those folks left out there in the field simply didn't know what was going on. That's why it's very important that you're communicating to all of your stakeholders and all of your geographic locations. So with that, I will wrap this up and thank you very much for participating today. We have some questions that may appear, and I will turn this over to Vernon here in Houston, who will look through some of our questions. Okay, Vernon.
Thank you, Alan. Good morning to everyone. My name is Vernon Hutchinson. I'm Director of Sales here in the U.S. I want to thank you all for attending the conference, and I'd also like to thank Alan for participating and allowing us to use his knowledge today. If you have questions, please post them, and I'll read them to Alan, and we'll get those answered as soon as possible. The first question here, interface management plans, same template for each project?
Right. So we've seen cases where what we have often tried to do is at least reuse the outline for an interface management plan, so that you make sure that you cover all of the various topics, but the interface management plan for your project really needs to be customized for your particular project. And so that customization is going to include things such as who your EPC folks are, or whoever is engaged in the project, naming and identifying all of the stakeholders, but also who is going to be responsible, things like single points of contact as well at each of the sites. Okay, we have a next question?
Yeah, we've got a couple more. So the next question is, what level of owner involvement is most appropriate?
Okay, so based on my experience with interface management, this level of owner involvement may vary with your particular project. So I've seen cases where the owner was highly involved and where the owner took great efforts to ensure that the overall interface management plan was defined, and also that these interface management plans dovetailed nicely with the contractors as well. One of the benefits of having the owner involved is you don't have situations where you have contractor A and contractor B simply lobbing questions back and forth to one another in the event that they may not be on a fixed base delivery time. So some of that's going to be dependent upon your contractual terms with those contractors. I have seen cases where a major operator simply didn't have enough experience with interface management, and so they effectively kind of threw the ball, if you will, to one of their EPC companies and said, you do it, please. So you guys manage it. Tell us when you need us to get involved. But essentially they delegated the responsibility for interface management to an outside third party. In my personal experience, if you have pretty solid experience within your owner company, I don't frankly see why you wouldn't want to have the owner company involved and taking a key role in interface management. Okay.
So I have another question here, Alan. What sort of industry owner EPC collaboration is required to further institutionalize interface management as a foundational element of project management?
Okay. Frankly, I believe that it's extremely important that you have some degree of collaboration really between the owner and the EPC, because you really do want to institutionalize interface management as a foundational element of project management. I've mentioned training before, where you have situations where people do not understand interface management. It's extremely important that you educate them and really educate all of the parties to the importance of interface management for the project and how it's going to be managed. Okay.
One more has come in. What constitutes a high-risk interface? That's a good question as well.
Okay. I talked about some hard interface points of things such as topsides touchdown points on the hull, things such as where your subsea equipment terminates in the topsides in a TUDA assembly, etc. Another very, very high-risk interface, if you're developing an offshore field, is I would say the export interface that is between the entire producing unit and some subsea pipeline delivery. So that's a very high-risk interface. Other things that should be considered high-risk interfaces would be interfaces where there's a high degree of process safety risk as well, where you could have, for instance, harm to the environment or harm to personnel. Those interfaces really, really do need to be managed appropriately and would be considered high-risk interfaces.
Perfect. Well, I believe that's all the questions we have on the board today. Again, I want to thank you all for attending. At this point, I'll turn it back over to Teresina.
Thank you.